going away. Bye.
Me?
Yeah. Are you in Maldives?
I'm in Mafushi. Yes, Mafushi.
Oh. Are you there for work?
Work and pleasure.
And then we can start now. Let me see. Okay. 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 Hello and welcome to everyone joining us today for this webinar on good governance and rule of law in 21st century that has been organized by Mazel Tov. Mazel Tov is a platform that advocates for sustainable legal systems through innovative practices and policies for the achievement of sustainable development goals. And currently, Mazel Tov is working to create a public dialogue to improve the access of justice, which is also a Sustainable Development Goal 16 of the United Nations. For discussion today on good governance and rule of law in the 21st century, we have with us Barrister Ali Tahir, and he's a practicing lawyer in Pakistan who practices in various areas of law, including but not limited to civil law, commercial law, constitutional law, labor law, and banking laws. And he has keen interest in current affairs, economic and constitutional development, foreign policy, and international law. Thank you so much for joining us, Ali Tahir. Just a few.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Just a few rules before we begin. We are not taking questions during the discussion. So in case any of the participants, in case any of our audience members, they have any questions, you can put your questions in the chat box to the right. And we may take your questions at the end of the session. And also I would request that you please ensure that your mic is muted during the discussion and also your videos are turned off. So, Ali Tahir, right off the bat, I would like you to explain to us the concept of good governance, since we understand that good governance coupled with rule of law is very important for the achievement of sustainable development goals. So it is very important for us to understand the concept of good governance in terms of what are the elements that constitute good governance.
That's an interesting question. You see, when we talk about good governance, it's more of a political term. It's not something that academically we can come down to a dictionary or a uniform definition. Different people, different theorists have come on and they've contributed differently to what good governance actually means. If you would take an example, let's talk about the metro bus in Lahore. One side of the political divide says that's something that is strictly in line with good governance. But the other side says that when there's a poverty line where 51% of the population is under it, that is not a part of good governance. In fact, that is a breach of good governance. Ultimately, when you talk about good governance, it's always going to be what you call political terminology. It's used as, generally speaking, it is used as a weapon to attack your opponents and to project yourself. But we do know, however, that obviously when you talk about good governance, you would be talking about some factors such as economically helping people, there being some sort of social alleviation, there being rule of law, there being political stability, there being justice at the doorstep, quick, effective, and redressal of grievances. That is what good governance would ultimately mean. And when you really look at it, a lawyer would have a very different definition of good governance from an economist, and an economist will have a very different interpretation of good governance from somebody who has an expertise in international relations. Ultimately, however, as I've already said, and at the expense of repeating myself, good governance would mean to govern in a manner that the fruits can go down to the lowest sections of the society. So basically, in my terminology, if I had to define it, I would say that good governance means a low-hanging fruit where the population can benefit from it.
Right. And what elements would you say? So if we speak of a good institution, what would you say that okay, this is you would say that this is good governance and this is bad governance. For example, it could be transparency in an institution. It could be accountability in an institution. So for specifically a developing country like Pakistan, what do you see in what is lacking in the institutions that makes it bad governance?
I think you've already cut a clear distinction and you've already answered half of the question. What good governance for an institution really means will differ from country to country. And there'll be many factors at play. And the most major factor of that would be whether it is a developed nation or it's a developing nation. Nations like Pakistan, which are still developing, I would say institutions, first of all, have to get autonomous. We do not have any autonomy in our institutions. We understand there's an institution that goes by the name of the Pakistan Armed Forces, which has autonomy and which can decide on its own. But otherwise, if you look at it, we've had a history of political upheaval because the institutions could not stand up to the mark. The courts have been disqualifying politicians when it is the job of the electorate, not of the courts. The army has taken over the country. The Rangers have taken over the civil government in one province. The FC have taken over the civil governance in another province. Foreign policy is not being made in the Foreign Office. There was so many multitude of factors. But I think at the core of it and at the crux of it is institutional autonomy, which, by the way, at least in the last 10 or 12 years, we've moved towards a place where institutions have, at least in the last 10 years, gotten a bit autonomous. If we look at the Election Commission of Pakistan, we see that things have gotten much better than the 90s or the 80s or the 70s when the Election Commission was nothing but something that worked on the sweet will of the government. And the same we have seen with an independent judiciary, which has completely tried to assert itself. We've seen it with the National Accountability Bureau as well. They've made some autonomous decisions, although some institutions remain to really, take that decision-making powers and the power to enforce those decisions. But I think we're moving in the right direction in the last 10 years at least, and especially if we really review the situation of the subcontinent, because so many political theorists have come before, they've already said that
Ali, we can't hear you. I think we lost you. I think it's his internet connection.
Yes. Can you please start my video as well? The host can start it. I can't start it. Yes. Okay, I'm sorry about that. I'm not sure what that was. I think there might be a connection problem.
No worries. So we were discussing about, Yeah, we were discussing about the independence of institutions. So we'll be discussing independence of judiciary just in a bit. But coming to the issues that are prevalent in Pakistan, say, for example, poverty, illiteracy, corruption, and even issues in our electoral processes, how would you say, how would you pinpoint the bad governance in those systems? So Ali, we have a lot of law students who have joined us, and this will be a recorded session as well, which will be made available to the law students. So for them to understand where exactly does it go wrong that leads to issues such as poverty, illiteracy, corruption, crime, terrorism.
Kanza, you see, there are no easy answers to it. People have been working to answer these questions since centuries. And if you look at the region right now, Pakistan is doing much better than its regional counterparts. If you look at India right now, it's really going, it's really rooting out minority rights. They're suppressing their minorities. Religious intolerance is at an all-time high. If you look at Bangladesh, there's political upheaval. Institutions are coming in and interfering with the political governments. Pakistan, at least in the last 10 years, has shown a tendency towards fundamental democracy. and constitutional democracy. And I think we are going on the same line. As far as the economy goes, Kanza, you know better than me that when there are two experts on the law, sometimes they never agree on a core point. In the same way, when it's about economics, two expert economists would be sitting, but one would be saying the government is doing the right, they're taking the right steps, and one would be severely criticizing it. Ultimately, I'm not an expert on the economy, but I think there are things that there are structure reforms that we need to initiate. For example, when you look at the tax base, it's only the salaried class that's paying the taxes. Even lawyers, me and yourself included, Kanza, we are not paying our due taxes. The services that we are charging our clients for, we under invoice it, and that's true. That's something that has to be said point blank. When a client, sometimes it's not even under invoice. Sometimes we do not even tell anybody that we have a client and we've charged them. The amount is transferred from the one account to another personal account, and it goes on. It is the salaried class, people who are earning 35.
It probably happens at your end, but I can vouch for my firm that doesn't happen at my firm at least.
I mean, obviously, we would all make promises, and we could all make pinky promises that we don't do it. But ultimately, lawyers do not pay taxes in this country. Accountants do not pay taxes in this country. People who are providing services do not pay taxes in this country. The ultimate tax burden, and those are statistics. Nobody can twist statistics. When you look at the statistics, the idea is that it is the salaried class at the end of the day that is paying the taxes because their tax is deducted at source. So the employees at law firms, their taxes are ultimately, cut, withheld at root, and so is the case with other people who are in the salaried class. But traders and lawyers and other sectors that are providing services, they're not paying their fair share to the economy. Now, I'm not saying I under invoice. I'm not putting it on myself, but I'm talking about generally. I'm not pointing a finger at you either. I'm not pointing a finger at anybody, but I'm saying as a matter of statistic, those sectors which should be contributing significantly to the tax base, they don't do it. Traders do not pay.
Who do you say is responsible? And who do you think is responsible? Where is the loophole?
I mean, you cannot hold the government responsible everywhere. You will not find. I'll tell you something. You go to Bolton Market, and you'll see traders trading in crores of rupees worth of goods every day. And they're so religious, they'll pray 5 times a day, they'll fast, and they'll give to charity. But when it comes to taxes, they do not pay their fair share of taxes. And I can guarantee...
that is what I'm trying to understand. If you leave it to individuals, nobody's going to pay taxes. Where is the loophole? Is the loophole, is it the government who's not enforcing the tax regulations properly?
The loophole is with the pressure groups. I mean, let's be honest. There was a service tax imposed on lawyers. We went to the court. We got a stay order. When they try to punch down the traders, they go on a strike. They say we are not going to sell goods. The markets are down. They kick people out of jobs. Ultimately, the pressure is too much for any political government to sustain. Ultimately, they have to say, we are at mistake. Please forgive us. Go do whatever you want.
But don't you think this is... So don't you think this is so the issue is actually with the government, that it is unable to enforce certain laws in the country? Why is it at the mercy of the citizens of the country? Why does the government...
If we talk practically, I will not agree with you. Ideally, yes. Theoretically, yes, you're right. It is the job of the government. The government should do it. But have you seen the reaction to the Aurat March in this country? Have you seen the reaction when people came out on the streets and gave a dharna in Islamabad? Are you going to kill those people? Are you going to put bullets in them? You can't do that. There are political ground realities to every country, and so there's a political ground reality to our country.
I think it's the constitutional right to freedom of speech as well. As long as they're not hurting anybody, they're just...
They did burn tires, they did kick policemen, they did beat down a lot of civilians, they stopped ambulances. I understand what freedom of expression is, but what I'm trying to tell you is that there are pressure groups in this country which political governments cannot sustain, and that's the ground reality. I understand that is not ideal.
if we accept the ground reality, then you mean that the issue of bad governance in the country can never be solved, because I don't think we're getting rid of the pressure groups at anytime soon.
I think it will take time because you see, if you look at the historical development, it seems that there are countries which have really turned themselves around. And there's no reason that Pakistan cannot turn itself around. Of course, we can, but it cannot happen overnight. There are no simple fixtures that we can do. And I do not blame any political government whatsoever. I mean, they must have made their mistakes. But to expect a government to turn around something in 7 or 14 or 21 days, it's just not practical. Just as an example.
I'm just trying to understand when you say 7 to 14 days, but the governments have been in power for 4 and 5 years as well. So is 4 and 5 years not sufficient for them to make changes in the economy?
You see, generally speaking, every chief justice that has come in Pakistan has promised that he will reform the judicial system. Why have they not been able to do so? They have not been able to do that because there are certain pressure groups that they have to succumb to. They have to bow down to certain political pressures. The same is the case with political governments. I mean, I remember Pakistan People's Party was in government. They tried to tax the traders. They came out on the streets. Pakistan Muslim League Noon tried to do it. They came out on the streets. The Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf tried to do it. They came out on the streets. In fact, the chairman of the FBR had to resign. He had to go home only because he was insisting on the traders to pay their fair share. The same thing happens with all of these industries, all of these pressure groups. And we've seen.
So speaking of the judiciary, Ali, we understand that adherence to the rule of law is a cornerstone of good governance. So it is important that there has to be rule of law, which means that there have to be institutions that are accountable to the law. Or this is something that is also reflected in the Constitution of Pakistan in the Article 184, where it is within the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court it has the responsibility to carry out judicial reviews. So it is from the power of the judicial review that most of the chief justices in the past, they have derived their power of judicial activism as well. And obviously judicial activism then a lot of times it becomes judicial overreach as well. So I'm just trying to understand that what is the role of judicial review in good governance? Is it the way it is exercised in Pakistan? So for example, if you look at how during the tenure of Justice Saqib Nisar, we see that he has made certain orders for evictions. And eviction is basically something that has to be taken care by the government, right? And when it comes to city governance, if the Supreme Court is going to make orders for city governance, then where has the separation of powers gone? So there has to be separate powers of what the government can do, what the legislation has to do, and what the judiciary is going to do. So we see that there is no separation of powers. So when chief justices of Pakistan, they start exercising judicial activism in this way, is it the right way to do, or is it just a show of power for them because they have that power given to them by the Constitution? Or is it misuse of judicial review?
You see, once again, when you talk about the rule of law, it has different definitions. It has a political definition, it has a moral definition, it has an ethical definition, and finally it has a legal definition. There was one by A.V. Dicey, you see, nobody can be hurt in goods or person unless for a distinct breach of the law and except established in an ordinary court of law. Sir Ivor Jennings had a different definition. In the same way, separation of powers has been defined differently by different constitutional experts. Some would say that it is where the personnel should not belong to the other branch. Some would say it is about checks and balances. You see, your question, I would have great difficulty in answering your question because if there's one case, I could give my opinion, my legal opinion on that, whether in this case, whether I think the judiciary overstepped its boundaries or not, or whether it was within its domain. So say, for example, when they took the suo
Right.
moto on the 2 bottles of alcohol at the airport, I think they definitely overreached their jurisdiction. That was not their job. That is not what they're supposed to do. But at the same time, when I see that they would take a suo moto notice, generally speaking, on real fundamental rights. So, for example, if you know about the Darsham Masih case, a suo moto notice was taken on a letter for bricklayer workers. I think that was a very good use of the review jurisdiction, and that is something that is the proper job of the Supreme Court. So ultimately, the answer would depend on what sort of suo moto, what sort of judicial review you are talking about.
But
I don't think there
so
can be
I'm
a
talking.
general answer.
So I'm talking about, say, so in the Constitution, in the Article 184 that I just referred to, basically it has to do with judicial review in issues of public importance, right? But if you consider our statutory laws, there is no definition of what constitutes as public importance or public interest. So in this case, the judiciary has a lot of power first to define what public interest is or public importance is, and then to take action on it, right? So for example, I will talk about the evictions case, as I just mentioned. So evictions happened at the Empress Market in Karachi in 2018. And then later on, we see that even Justice Gulzar Ahmad, he has passed Supreme Court orders where he has talked about beautification of Karachi. So is beautification of Karachi a matter of public importance? But nobody has been able to stand up to him to say that this is not public importance, right? So because we do not have definition, but if you look at the laws in India, Indian laws, they do define what is public interest and what is public importance. So it is easier to hold the courts even accountable. So when we talk about rule of law, there has to be some restraint to their powers as well. Do you agree to that?
Kanza, I will not agree with that. There are a few reasons. Let's talk about there not being a definition. If you look at the UK, their constitutional principles have no definitions. They generally go about and write their own judgments. So, for example, in the Brexit case, the one where the parliament was prorogued by the prime minister, there was no statutory law to define it, but they, on sound constitutional principles, decided that it was unconstitutional for the prime minister to prorogue parliament at a stage when it was considering such an important issue. And as far as public importance goes, the Supreme Court has already, first in the case of Sheikh Liaquat Hussain, and then in the case of General Bajwa, the extension case, they've already decided what public importance means. As far as the orders of the Supreme Court go, you see what happens is sometimes TV channels misreport. When there's a courtroom, of course, we are not robots. Lawyers and judges are not robots. We talk with each other. When we talk with each other, sometimes lawyers say some stupid stuff, and judges at the end of the day are human beings as well. Sometimes they say things that maybe they should not have said. But the real thing that should be looked at in terms of criticism is the orders of the court. I have not found any order of the Honorable Supreme Court where I think that they have actually gone out of their jurisdiction. It is the right of every citizen to petition for fundamental rights. There were people who came to the Supreme Court and who filed appeals, and ultimately it was discovered that China cutting is taking place in Karachi. The water utilities and the sewerage utilities are being undermined. People are selling government land by encroaching upon it. And I think the Supreme Court was absolutely justified in taking action on it. Yes, I do agree that in the environment that we live in, the Supreme Court should be very careful of the remarks it passes, because it flashes on the TV screens and it comes in the newspapers.
Yeah, I understand. Ali, in addition to just it being reported on the media, I think what Supreme Court has failed to understand is it is easier for them to pass an order saying we should remove encroachments from the city to beautify the city. But what about the fact that there are no public housing that has been provided to the people? So what kind of governance is that if you haven't provided? So if you remove those encroachers, where are they going to go? Is the question. Why is Supreme Court? Why hasn't Supreme Court Commission to first research on what the impact of it is going to be, and then pass an order?
I agree with your first part. Of course, it is always easier for orders to be passed. It is always difficult to implement those orders. But you see, when we talk about encroachment of public lands, it is at the end of the day the land of the government. People like you and me, Kanza, have not encroached those lands. People who have encroached those lands should be held accountable. They've made billions of rupees. They've made people settle on it.
That's right.
They've made
That's
houses.
right. But Ali, I've also been a part of a research where we found out that 50% of our population of Pakistan lives in Kachi Abadis, which are informal settlements. And people who are living in Kachi Abadi, these are people who earn around 5,000 to max 25,000 a month. So it is very difficult for them to own property. Until and unless they are provided public housing or there is support from the government, I don't think that they will be able to have shelter for themselves. And shelter is one of their constitutional right. So, I mean, if they have made some temporary houses for themselves in the Kachi Abadis, so this is exactly what has happened in the issue of Karachi Circular Railway as well, that people had encroached the railway lines, and that was because they did not have access to any public housing that is not provided by the government. So who is going to be blamed for it? Now you ask them basically you ask them, you evict them from their houses. Where are they going to go? So if you evict these encroachers, encroachers just gives them just attaches illegality to their existence.
Okay, first of all, I will disagree. I will disagree with the fact that I have the right to just go on some land and build my house on it, and that's a constitutional right. I will disagree with that. As far as the constitutional right of property goes, I think we're talking about Article 23 of the Constitution. It says property that is in my name cannot be taken away by the government.
I'm talking about the right to shelter. I'm talking about the fundamental right to shelter.
You see, the fundamental right to shelter is a subsidiary of the right to property. If you look at Article 23, otherwise, when you look at the fundamental rights, there's no fundamental right to shelter. It's a subsidiary right of Article 9, the right to life, and of Article 23, the right to own property. If I own property, there is no doubt that nobody can take it away from me. The government can take it away from me, but when they pay just and fair compensation. But that does not give me the right to go on any land and construct a house and say, you see, this is my constitutional right, I'm going to stay here. If I don't have a property, if I don't have a house, I have to struggle. Right. And the laws are same for me, the laws are same for you, the laws are same for everybody. You have to earn your bread and butter, you have to take up a house. As far as the Kachi Abadi goes, I understand the issue at end. And the issue is one of resettlement. The issue is not one where people would build up their houses on railway lands or on sewerage lines or on water reservoirs, and they can be allowed to continue, because cities do not run this way. Even in New York, you have homeless persons. In the UK, the rich countries, you have homeless persons. In Europe, you walk down in Paris, you'll see homeless persons. They cannot just build a house wherever they want. Resettlement laws are there.
So is it that we should just accept homelessness in our country?
Not at all. There are resettlement laws, and it is the job of the government to resettle those Kachi Abadis. Kachi Abadi ke upar, there are plentiful of statutes and by rules and by laws on how those people are going to be settled. And if you look at the lines area, it was once a Kachi Abadi, but it was properly managed. Now people have Pakka houses there. This is not a problem of 2021. This has been a problem since 1947 and even beyond. And there are rules and laws to deal with it. The issue with China cutting this.
Speaking of resettlement and rehabilitation, I have done extensive research on this, and I don't agree with you when you say that there is resettlement and rehabilitation laws. We had a policy that was drafted in 2002, but it has not been passed. And it has not been a priority for the government to pass this policy, resettlement. So while the Land Acquisition Act, which is a colonial law, it does allow for the land to be acquired by the government because it has the power of eminent domain, but it does not provide for resettlement. So again, it comes to the issue of governance. On one hand, the government has the right to appropriate land, but on the other hand, it has no policy for how to resettle the affectees. So that's again, I think what we're coming to is that we don't have proper rules and regulations. The problem is with the enforcement that leads to bad governance. The problem comes to not properly devised regulations. I mean, and then it comes to, again, the political influence that is there on the institutions. And again, bad governance also stems from not having separation of powers in, you know how we study in public law, a very academic concept of separation of powers. So the authorities that are responsible, say, the judiciary, the legislation, and the executive, that is the government, there has to be separation between their powers. So one cannot meddle with the powers of the others. So we see that all of these are prevalent in Pakistan, and that is what is creating most of
I
the
can't properly hear you. I'm so sorry. I can't properly hear you.
Right. Can you hear me now? So, Ali, speaking of rule of law, how have you seen that it has been achieved in developed countries, and how would you suggest it be implemented in
Kanza,
Pakistan?
I can't properly hear you. I'm so sorry.
Ali, Ali, can you hear me now? Hello. Hello. Okay. I wonder if it's an issue at my end. I think Ali has. Okay, he's back. Ali, can you hear me now?
I can hear you. I can hear you now.
Yeah, so Ali, as we were talking about rule of law, I just wanted to understand how rule of law has helped achieve good governance in developed countries. And how do you think that we can implement the same in Pakistan to achieve good governance? While we have already established what the issues of good governance are in Pakistan, but how do you see that it has been achieved in developed countries?
Kanza, with your permission, before I answer this question, can I just quickly just complete my last answer, just three sentences?
Sure.
Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah, that's absolutely.
Okay. See, I completely respect and defer to your research. I believe that might be, you're very competent. That might be really good research. In fact, I would be longing to read it. But at the same time, I do think that when you look at the Colonization of Government Lands Act, along with the Land Grant Policy and the Cooperative Housing Societies Act, I think the government has enough legal provisions available to settle people if they want to. There's a Kachi Abadis Act as well. If they want to resettle and rehabilitate people, the government can do it. So all I wanted to add was that at the end of the day, it is the government, not the courts, which are to blame for such public encroachment of public lands, of state lands, which the judiciary is under oath to protect. That being said, coming to the other question, the rule of law and good governance, I agree with you. Rule of law is a necessary component of good governance. If you look at the UK, they started it with Antic and Carrington. Back in that day and age, in the 17th century, they decided that if it is not in the law books, then the government has no power to do it. It's different for third world countries, of course. Here, if you have power, then you're legally empowered to do anything. In fact, when there was a coup in 1999, the Supreme Court did judicial gymnastics to protect that coup and to give it constitutional protection when Article 6 clearly states that nobody can subvert or hold in abeyance the Constitution. But that is how things are. And I think when you talk about rule of law and taking the legal definition of rule of law, that there has to be complete equality of the law before the courts, and that nobody can be judged by somebody who's a party to the case, and the fact that even if somebody has committed something, and this is all contained in Article 4 of our great Constitution, that even if I have committed an offense, that has to be established in the ordinary courts of the law. It is the government that has to establish a case against me. They cannot decide against me. I think in case that sort of a system actually takes root, a constitutional democracy develops, good government will result. But just a few days ago, Irfan Jatoi was killed in a fake police encounter. He was picked up from his hostel. He was kept illegally within the custody of the police for 2 weeks. And finally, the police, being the judge itself, decided, okay, fine, now we are going to kill him. And they martyred the guy. He was a student. He never got a trial. These are true facts and facets of our society, which continue unabated. And I think at this point, I will join you in criticism of the judiciary, that the judiciary has miserably failed to protect those individual rights, especially of people from the rural communities. Yes, the government is at fault. We agree with that. But I do not think that the judiciary has played the same role that it should have.
Right. So in the end, we do agree that we need a stronger judiciary in order to have good governance in the country.
Absolutely. The better, the better. I mean, the more efficient, the better. The more efficacious, the better. The more speedy, the better. The more learned, the better. Absolutely, there's never a stop to it.
And the less politically influenced, the better.
I mean, we have made considerable progress on that end. The judges today are much more independent than 10 years ago or 11 years ago. After the 2007 Long March, the judiciary has been much more effective. And for right now, at least, if you have to give Pakistan some credit compared to India or Sri Lanka or Bangladesh in this region, our judiciary is far more independent than the rest of the subcontinent or the rest of the region, even if you include China.
Thank you so much, Ali. I think you're traveling, and we will have to end this session. Unfortunately, we have a few questions, but I don't think we will be able to take them. Maybe we could have a follow-up session later sometime when we could take questions from the audience as well. But thank you so much for joining us, Ali. And thank you so much for your time as well.
It was completely my pleasure. Thank you so much. And I apologize if I said something in a rude tone, or if I said something that might not have gone very well. And I apologize for that.
No worries about that. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. I am so sorry that we cannot take questions at this point in time. Ali has very limited time. He has to be somewhere else. But we will be able to have another session sometime soon, and then we'll take your questions. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
With due deference. Thank you very much.